Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for choosing this workshop. My name's Ian Hall. I'm the Head of Service Improvement, Midlands and East, NHS Improvement. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this workshop on the campaigns that we've been running in Midlands and East to highlight the importance of patient time, including hashtag Red2Green, last 1,000 days, and end pyjama paralysis. I've been asked to remind you that questions to go on Glisser, is it? Yeah. Please select the session on Glisser and submit your questions, and we'll pick those up at the end. Hello. So please take a seat. Okay. So on the warm-up act really for this afternoon, the people you really want to hear from are Pete Gordon, Midlands and East ECIST lead, and Sinead Collins from West Suffolk FT. Pete's going to talk you through the last 1,000 days, problems of unnecessary waiting, the Safer Flow bundle, and our Red2Green approach. And Sinead's going to talk you through the experiences at West Suffolk, and intriguingly titled The Big Bang Approach to Safer and Red2Green. So the next few minutes I'm going to talk you through how we've organised and run the campaign and summarise the impact we believe it's had to date. So last autumn, NHS Improvement and NHS England agreed to fund a 6-month programme initially of targeted and universal support for the testing of Red2Green. We commissioned support from NHS Elect to help us develop and deliver both universal and targeted support. We started off by organising and running 2 launch events last November, and we had 226 people attend those launch events, and we had about 33 of our 39 acute providers attend. And these were excellent events according to the evaluation. And we received great input from ECIST colleagues and some really provocative and thought-provoking support and input from Dr. Ian Sturgis. For those that you know Ian, you'll know what I mean. And he really helped everyone think about the impact on patients of unnecessary waiting, which really lies at the heart of this. So it got us off to a great start to the campaign. Through ECIP, there are lots of resources were made available initially through the ECIP website and more latterly through the NHS Improvement Hub website. And that's really helpful, so you can go onto the Improvement Hub and you can find the tools and rapid improvement guides, etc. for Red2Green on there. We had ECIP on site at 14 trusts at the time, so they were receiving dedicated support around Red2Green as part of the ECIP offer, but then we also selected 10 other trusts to work with and offer a range of support, including masterclasses, webinars, coaching, action learning sets. And really that was a mixture of both the practical about how do you go about implementing Red2Green, but also about improvement methodology, measurement for improvement, change management, triumvirate coaching, leadership, etc. So we had in total 24 out of our 39 trusts were receiving dedicated targeted support around this. And that's really important actually in terms of the time and effort that's gone into supporting our trusts. If we move on to the intensive week, throughout the campaign really we've had really good engagement across social media, communication efforts, and really trying to create a social movement. During the intensive week, there were additional Twitter chats, additional case studies being presented, and we had over 2,000 tweets during that week sharing good practice and stories. So that's really impressive, isn't it? 2,000 in 1 week. And that was all self-generated. And I think what I'd like to say about this is that this has always been promoted as something that's about self-generated. This isn't about a regulator trying to impose something on the sector. This is really a test. It's a big PDSA about how we can generate interest around looking at issues around flow in a different way than perhaps we've traditionally done. We had a couple of events not long ago, sharing success events. We thought it was really important to bring back people, so we'd set them off at the launch events. We wanted to bring them back, and we had a great couple of days actually. We had presentations from 7, 8, 9 trusts over the course of those 2 days. 240 people turned up, and there's a really good buzz in the room actually. We've got Red2Green champions now. We've got people awarded for their posters. If you go on social media, there's been some fantastic posters that have been developed. But also there's constraints as well. We had a session on what are the constraints, and in a moment, before I finish, I'll just talk about some of those and what we're going to be doing next. In terms of evaluation, and this is ongoing, it's only 6 months or so in, and therefore, we don't expect everything to be fully resolved at this stage, and it's a hugely complex area we're talking about. But we decided to use, some of you may be familiar with the Kirkpatrick model, 4-step model, to evaluate, and I think it's particularly well suited actually to this kind of programme campaign. I don't want to call it a programme, I don't want to call it a campaign, it's something in between the two, I think. So in terms of reaction, we had really good attendance at launch events and the learning events, really good social media interaction, and 83% of people who responded to a survey we sent out said the support materials were good. So we're confident we'd had a good reaction. Under learning, we've had over 7,000 views of the ECIP resources that now sit on the Improvement Hub. Pretty much all of our acute trusts are doing Red2Green in some sort of form. And we've got a growing number of non-acute trusts and actually systems, and I think Sinead will talk about this from the east perspective, east part of our region in a while, but a growing number of systems come together to talk about patient flow at a collective level. We've had over 7,500 staff that have been trained locally in some of the tools and techniques, and we've seen trusts go about adapting and holding their own local events, which is great because a number of speakers have said it already today, haven't they? You can't copy and paste improvement methodologies. They have to be locally adapted and locally enshrined within local cultures. Under behaviour, I think we're starting to get some of the traits of social movement, but I'm not an expert, so I'll leave others to decide that. What we have seen is 92% of respondents to our survey said that they had changed their processes around patient flow and that this had improved things within their environments, including things such as ward and board rounds. However, again, note of caution, I think we all know there's still a long way to go, huge amount of variation, and we're going to pick those issues up as we move along. In terms of results, I guess ultimately my boss will want to know about A&E 4-hour wait, and that's fine. We know that ultimately anything we do around patient flow should help in terms of reducing waiting at the front door. And surprise, surprise, we haven't seen a universal improvement in our 4-hour performance, but we are starting to see a number of case studies where trusts are voluntarily saying that they've implemented Red2Green, it's been adopted well by staff locally, it's improving patient flow processes, and it's started to improve or support the improvement of ED performance. And West Suffolk are a good example of that today. I've talked about social media. I think Pete will pick up on this as well. Over 27 million impressions on Twitter since we started, 24,000 tweets and over 3,000 participants on Twitter. That's really good stuff, isn't it, in terms of starting to get real enthusiasm, which, as I say, is bottom up rather than top down. So for my final moment before I hand over to Pete, just wanted to go back to what we're going to do next. I think it does require a little bit of regional coordination. So some of the things we talked about on a call the other day are continue to focus our support on trust, but particularly on community trusts, mental health trusts, and at a system level. We've got some great examples of community mental health trusts coming forward now and starting to test Red2Green, and even care homes as well, starting to test Red2Green in their environment. We're going to work with Health Watch and patients and carer groups to better evaluate the positive impact this can have on patients, for all patients and carers, and to do further tests around that. There's potentially some in-depth research offer on the table. Clinical engagement, I think, when we had our learning events, comes across as a potential constraint within some of our hospital environments. I think we need to reflect on the language we use. Does it switch people on? Does it switch people off? Is there a different way of doing that with clinical colleagues? So we're going to use our clinical champions to advise us on this. And as a sort of in parallel to this, we're going to develop a peer support network for clinical directors in urgent and emergency care, again voluntary, but if they want to join, really to support them in the difficult conversations they have to have with colleagues in their organisations, and also to focus on medical director sponsorship. I think it's really helpful when medical directors are willing to personally sponsor this work. Constraints, we need to make sure that boards address the constraints that staff raise. So when it's all based on theory of constraints, so we need to make sure that boards are responding to their staff. And the practical support as well, going back to the Improvement Hub, make sure we've got a constant supply of practical support. And then we're going to continue. I've given a commitment to all our organisations that we're going to meet again in another 6 months' time, get them back together again and hear about their stories. So a real commitment to this being a long-term investment. Okay, I'll hand you over at that point. Hand you over to Pete. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ian. So, hi everybody. My name's Pete Gordon. I work for the Emergency Care Improvement Programme. I'm the regional lead for Midlands and East. I'm a nurse by background, manager, improver, mild troublemaker at times, which I think is a positive trait. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take it back to, why would you do this? Red2Green and the Safer Patient Flow Bundle are just tools. But for normal people, for staff nurses, junior doctors, therapists working on the front line, they're not really interested in a 95% access target, if you're being honest, are they? They're not really, it doesn't get them. But what does tend to get people is a genuine, compelling story. And so these facts and figures, I think, are probably a genuine, compelling story. 48% of people die, over 85 die within 1 year of hospital admission. So if you're over the age of 85 in this room, half of you will die within 1 year. 10 days in an acute hospital or a community hospital is the same as 10 years physical deconditioning in the muscles of frail older people. I'd ask you to think about that. That creates a compelling story. That will get people motivated to do something else. And as our good friend Brian Dolan, if you're listening in, Brian, hello. He's in Australia at the moment, Professor Brian Dolan, who's a real great international improver. He talks about patients' time being the greatest currency in health and social care. And I know when I heard this, it gripped me. Patients' time is precious. And Red2Green, if you're really arguing about how to measure it and top-down nonsense like performance management, you're doing it wrong. The whole aim is to give some of these patients back their time. And Brian coined the phrase when he was working in Canterbury, is if you had 1,000 days left to live, how many of those days would you choose to spend in hospital? And this is nothing new. So in 1942, Dr. Asher did his paper. So this is going way before I think anyone here was born. It's just a hunch. And he talks about it's always assumed that the first thing in any illness is to put the patient to bed. Yet we should think twice about before ordering our patients to bed and realise that beneath the comfort of the blankets there lurks a host of formidable dangers. Teach me to live that I may dread the grave as little as my bed. Think about that, because actually if you're doing Red2Green really, really well, your patients will be up and moving. So just to build on the concept of time, time's precious, the last 1,000 days. Every single one of you in this room has a figure on top of your head, and that is the number of days you have left to live. For our frail older patients, that time is limited. Keeping them in hospital, stranded, is the wrong thing to do. So just bear with me while I play a 1-minute video.
The day's almost over, the sky's about to show her the first glimpse of gold over waking up dreams. And thing is, I don't know why things that I felt so concerned with just let go, drift with the breeze. I've been running around looking for answers, and all of these days there still ain't enough. Like the moonlit late plains, let the questions just hang. All I need is time with your love. I've been running around looking for answers, and all of these days there still ain't enough. There ain't enough. Time with you, love. There ain't enough.
So, just check right here. Time's precious. So when you go back to your organisations, because the risk with Red2Green is everybody tries to performance manage it. Stop people in their tracks. The whole point about Red2Green is giving patients back their time. If there's one thing you take from us today, it's that point. And the risks of hospital-based deconditioning are more severe than we realise. Within the first 24 hours, frail older patients lose 2 to 5% of muscle power. If you look at this poster here, Fred needs 100% of his power. He's trapped in bed, he's in his pyjamas, right? No one's giving him a hand to get out of bed. He needs 100% of his physical reserve to get out of bed. Within 24 hours, your quadriceps start going if you're a frail older patient. When it gets to 7 days, if you surprisingly develop a hypostatic pneumonia, that is because of the things we haven't done. A lot of those days are red days. My point there really, without trying to scare you, is to say that's the compelling story, guys. Because one of the things we know is to do this thing properly, you need to connect emotionally as well as logically. There's lots of logic in the NHS. There's lots of project initiation documents which never filter down to the front line. To really make a sort of leap forward, we need that connection. And I mean, the other thing with Red2Green and the Safer Patient Flow Bundle is, you know, this thing about optimism bias, it's rife throughout the NHS. Next year, we're going to reduce emergency admissions by 10%, What a load of codswallop. No, this we see all the time. So Red2Green and the Safer Patient Flow Bundle, they're not going to change the world, but you know what they will do? They'll make a bit of an improvement, and they will give patients back their time. And a key message for us in ECIP is that beds aren't capacity. Beds are places where patients wait for the next thing to happen. And if you think really, really carefully about that. I trained in the 1980s as a nurse. You probably don't think so because I look so young and youthful. Thanks. But if you take along the bottom there, that's a typical patient journey. They come in and they get some care. They wait. They're sleep deprived. You know, if you put my mum in your hospitals, she's in an environment where there's 5 other women in the same bed as her. She's not used to the sheets. As she gets more and more weary, gets confused. Then there's waiting. Then there's more sleep deprived sleep. You know, beds are places where patients wait to happen. Capacity is people. Capacity isn't beds, and it's people, the right people, wrapped around the patient. And one of the things in Red2Green, this is a study by Monitor from a couple of years ago, is where is the greatest waiting for patients in a hospital? It's in those wards behind the assessment units, behind EDs tend to work quite fast. That doesn't mean the staff aren't working hard. They are working hard, but from a patient's perspective, that's where they're losing a lot of time. And then Red2Green, Ian alluded to this, is based on the theory of constraints. What we tend to do in the NHS is say we're going to try and deal with everything. And Red2Green, one of the key things here is to say what are the top 3 reasons on a ward, a department, a directorate, what are causing the constraints. If you can't describe that, you're not doing the approach properly. So here we go, here's Mario bashing. I've got 4 boys, you know, you go to the fair and you use that thing where people just randomly bash things down. What Red2Green should do is say these are the things we should be focusing on. But they come with a health warning. Without the right attitudes, behaviours and cultures, you know, if we suddenly turn this into some mandate. I mean, I created the Safer Patient Flow Bundle, I'll be honest with you, and to see it almost mandated is not how it was created from the person who created it. I created it being an ex-senior nurse from critical care based on the ventilator care bundle. These are improvement approaches. But yeah, the ABCs are fundamentally important. Red2Green needs to link with the Safer Patient Flow Bundle. Have you heard of the Safer Patient Flow Bundle? Amazing. But you have to do all 5 elements. You can't just do the easy ones. And a top tip, if you're going to start with the middle, start with the F. Start pulling those patients early in the day. So Red2Green, when I first heard about it from the clinicians who designed it in our team, a red day is of limited value, a green day is a day of value, but it's slightly more complicated than that. A red day, anything can be red. If something doesn't go to plan for a patient, that can be a red day. You know, if you have lots of red days, is that a good or a bad thing? That's okay, that's all right. So trying to performance manage down the number of red days is the wrong thing to do. The wards that declare the most red days are the wards who are doing it properly, because the things we're interested in are the measures improving. Are patients getting home a bit earlier? Are they more satisfied? So some key questions here would be, if I saw this patient today in outpatients, would I admit them? Does this patient need an acute level of care? Could this patient be dressed today? Did I say that this patient was going to have a diagnostic today? Did it happen? Has this patient got a plan? If they haven't got a plan, is it a red day or a green day? Shout it out. It's a red day. My dad was admitted to hospital before Christmas with an MI, and he had 2 asystolic standstills, and I got to my local hospital, I'd been working away, and I looked in his notes, and an agency nurse was like, oh, here's his notes, and there was no plan. How does that make you feel? As a son, not as a nurse. Yeah, it's a red day. That was a red day for me, and that was a red day for my dad. And then, you know, to say that a lot of people don't have red days, we have no delays, we hear that a lot. Do you know people are working really hard? I can tell you the NHS is littered with red days. This is my mum in the Midlands hospital. She had an operation on the Tuesday, went to pick her up on the Friday. They said to me, do you know she's got AF? I said, I know that. She said it for about 6 or 7 years. Can I take her home? No, we're going to have to keep her in over the weekend to monitor her warfarin levels. Her INR, sorry. Really? I'm a pretty persuasive chap. I'll come and pick her up at 10 o'clock on Monday morning. Actually, the way we do things around here is we do the ward round, then we do the TTOs and the letter afterwards. Could you come at 3 o'clock? What time do you think she left?
7.
5:30. But the journey at the M6 took about 2 hours. The point is there's lots of stranded patients, and we always externalise stuff. There's things which are in those of you in an acute hospital, there is stuff in your grip today when you go back to your organisations. One of the big things for us is, are your patients informed? And we've got 4 key questions. No one ever argues with these questions. If any of you have had a loved one in hospital, you would want to know these questions. Both of my parents were in hospital at the same time, just before Christmas. I've had it quite a stressful situation, but what I did want to know is I wanted to know the answer to these questions. The questions are, do I know what is wrong with me or what has been excluded, which takes a senior person. Do I know what is going to happen now, later today, tomorrow to get me sorted out? What are the things you're going to do to me? And tell me my language. A CTPA, what is that? It sounds painful. Where are you going to put it? And what does it look like? You know, so speak to me normally. And you know what? If I'm a HCA and say I'm washing my colleague Tim here, God forbid Tim, I can tell you what's going to happen today. I can tell you what's going to happen. You know, today, Tim, the plan is that you're not going to use a commode by the side of your bed. Today, you're going to walk to the toilet. You're going to have a test this afternoon. It's as simple as that. What do I need to achieve to go home? The clinical criteria for discharge. And if my recovery is ideal and there's no unnecessary waiting, when can I expect to go home? When you go back to your organisations, ask your patient representative groups to randomly ask your patients this and listen to what they say. When we've looked at complaints across England, from a patient's perspective, a lot of the time it feels very, very rushed at the end. So you could take away these questions. One of the things that you could do in a board round is say, do our patients know the answer to these 4 questions every day? And if they don't, you could say, actually, that's a red day, because our patients aren't informed enough. And there's lots of organisations which are, you know, doing lots of things. This is a picture from Northampton. This mat actually was originated in Cambridge. What's wrong with this lady in the top left? Not what's wrong with her diagnosis-wise, because you'd be very clever if you worked that out. But tell me what's wrong with the picture.
She's got her pyjamas on.
Brilliant. Yeah, she's got her pyjamas on. I'm going to talk about that in a second. So some very, very practical tips about that we've learned doing the campaign in Midlands and East, and I think it's really great for us because we really collaborate with the regional team, with Ian and his boss Mark Cubban. But these are some really practical tips. If you're doing a board round, start every day as red, and be brave about that. So every patient is red, and then don't turn them green until those actions have been completed. So it doesn't matter if the whole board is red; it doesn't matter. And develop a local list of reasons for red days. So if it's not a senior decision maker, is it a red day or a green day?
Red.
Yeah, guys, it's probably difficult to get many of these questions wrong. Okay, what about if I'm going to have just a plain chest x-ray today and it doesn't happen? Red day, yeah. What about if I'm waiting for some repetitive, long-winded assessment to get me out of hospital? Yeah, it sounds like a red day to me. And what about if could be dressed and I'm not dressed?
Red.
Yeah, it could be a red day. The trick there, though, is to localise the reasons yourself and let the teams have input into them. And, you know, for each of those reasons, put a timestamp next to them. And then use the 4 questions. One of the other top tips is to just do a routine huddle in the afternoon. It doesn't need the most senior person in there, just nurse in charge, therapist, the doctor on the ward. And the purpose of the afternoon huddles, did the things we said we were going to do this morning, did we actually do them? And at that point, you can turn your patients green or red. Remember, the big thing prize isn't turning everyone red. That isn't the big prize. The big prize is making things happen. And then clinical buy-in, Ian's alluded to that. And one of the things I'd say at clinical buy-in is if you really use the model for improvement, plan, do, study, act, if you really use it properly and you really use a bit of measurement, you'll get the doctors involved. But one of the big things about PDSA, have you all heard of PDSA? I guess you have because you're at the NHS Improvement conference. Most people don't do it. They try to do it too big. PDSA can be too big, it can never be too small. When you go back to base, because the risks we come into conferences like this, they're nice, the lunch was lovely, wasn't it? But you don't do anything. So why don't you all commit at the end of this session that you're going to do at least one PDSA? You're going to test something out with Red2Green with the sole aim of giving patients back their time. You need to track the red, you need some sort of tracking system, but you know what, this isn't the biggest issue. Most people seem to get wrapped up, how are we going to measure the red days, how are we going to do this? Much better that you start it on a piece of paper and give it a go than getting really wrapped up with this stuff. And then there will be some red days which can't be sorted out on a ward, and there's a disease which is spreading across England at the moment, and that disease is called escolitis. And so it's not escalation, and it's just passing things up aimlessly. Does that sound familiar to any of you? Yeah, so we need to put a stop to this. Someone said it's not a disease, it's a syndrome the other day. So what? I don't really care. But we are going to escalate issues. What we should probably use is SBAR. Have you heard of SBAR? We used to use it in critical care outreach a lot. What's the situation, the background, the assessment? What's my recommendation to escalate issues upwards? And if I escalate issues upwards, as a matter of respect, if I escalate them to you and you're more senior, what I'd like you to do is come back to me and tell me what you've done about it. Because a lot of the time, the problem with escalitis is we're just passing it up and we hear nothing. And then the staff lose a bit of faith. And then measurement for improvement. Every ward should have a Pareto chart in it, which is what are the top 3 to 5 things which are causing our patients to wait. And next to it, some run charts or SPC charts. None of these red, amber, green stuff. It doesn't mean anything. Just use measures like this. And there will be people in your area who can advise you about this. But the big thing for me would be, is if I walked onto your ward, would you have a knowing how you're doing board? So are these things visual? And the biggest question I'd say is to your staff nurse and your junior doctor, do you know about Red2Green, and can you tell me how you're doing with the improvement measures? So what percentage of your patients go before midday, how you're doing with your number of discharges, what's your median length of stay, how you're doing with your stranded patients. And now I'm going to hand over to Sinead, and just to build Sinead up a bit on West Suffolk. So Sinead was a last minute stand-in. Not last minute, brilliant, but we've been working a bit with West Suffolk, and I visited them in December, one very dark and misty morning in December. I felt as rough as anything, and what I found was a brilliant team, and 95% isn't everything, but they started their journey in the new year, and they've shown some great results. And actually Leslie Standring, who can't be here today, if you're looking in, Leslie, and you're feeling unwell, hello. But she's formed a network of lots of organisations across the east of England to work on Red2Green. But Sinead is now going to talk about the experience of West Suffolk.
So I have to vouch for also that regional meeting that happened. We now also set up a Dropbox where all the regional hospitals are sharing their information, which we are finding useful, because I know Queen Elizabeth have been very proactive with the communication while West Suffolk haven't. So it's a good sharing experience as well. So as you saw the title, we did the big bang approach rather than the gradual approach. It's not right or wrong, but that's the West Suffolk way, I'll say. So we did have a starting point. We did ward self-assessments. We realised board rounds were being done in some wards, mainly medical wards. The ward rounds themselves started at different times, which then didn't help a senior review happening before 12. I know some were finishing at 4, which is now stopped. Also, the ward round order has changed. We still do see the sick first, but then it moves on to the discharges for today, and then the rest afterwards. PDDs, as you can see, there's a huge variety on that, and that has improved since we started this. So, one thing I'll say about consistency is important. I always have a similar process, but they are adapted to the area. This helps medical and nursing teams if by chance they want to switch wards, and they have show good general practice, but also helps improve patient expectation if wards follow similar processes. So how we started was actually in November 2016. We had ward managers attend a Red2Green today, and the TNO and ward and a general general medicine ward took up the challenge. We noticed small changes, but that's why we decided to go for Big Bang, which happened in January. But one thing we initiated also at the time was a flow action group, which is happening every fortnight, and we're following up on actions, and it's a good general process, and that's still ongoing. And also executive support, which also happened when we did the Big Bang. So this was generally a trust exec push out led charge, and it helped when it came to getting the nurses involved, the therapists involved, and it actually worked rather than going through the gradual process for us. But there were definitely lessons to learn. For example, the 8:30 start for all wards wasn't appropriate for all wards. These are all the different things that we kind of focused on. For example, we have a community of hospitals in Newmarket and just outside of our hospital, and they have taken on the process because it then helps with the patient flow. Whiteboards, so we have based it on what was on the information hub, but we have introduced, for example, the 3 red reasons why they haven't been discharged. So doctors that we found, they wouldn't listen unless you showed them something. And so we found this quite useful in portraying things that we can learn from. Also focus on Fridays, because we also found that patients were staying in the weekends when they could have gone home in the interim. So what we've also introduced is making clear, we've gone into an electrical system, and our clinical criteria is more specific and can actually write what they need to go home, and it doesn't have to be a doctor. If the consultant has written what they need to go home, they can go home earlier rather than wait till Monday. And also on that whiteboard there's the Red2Green. You can actually just specify, and so when it comes to the afternoon huddle they can identify what can be changed back. One thing we did struggle on was communication, because I'm not sure if you in most hospitals there isn't one way to communicate to everyone in the hospital, and we have a green sheet which communicates to doctors and therapists, but the doctor method wasn't effectively done, and we've learned from that. So we now have workshops, and Pete has attended to some of those as well, and they've definitely become more engaged, and we've used stories where a consultant wasn't interacting with the process and now sharing them with other people, those stories. There's many other things, and if you want to contact about anything, happy to talk, as well as Leslie Standring, who isn't here today. So as I said, they did highlight gaps. One thing was data, because we thought we could produce the dashboard, but we actually couldn't gather the data historically, and we're still actually working on that. But we are doing it manually. So we are recording it, but it might not be the best at the moment, but there's always room for improvement. So what worked for us are all these separate things. Yeah, cool. Ward managers engaged, therapists engaged. The pharmacy have been very engaging, and one thing, we've had a side project where we're now working on TTOs, and we're trying, as soon as the board rounds happen in the morning, we are going to have the junior doctors meet with the pharmacists, go through the people being discharged, and then they have the ward round afterwards. So hopefully to improve and quicken that TTO process. PDDs, as you said, we're rapidly improving. Transport and IV home therapy, they are expanding their service, but they're doing a separate project to that, but they are feeding into that flag group, so we're still aware and sharing it with the rest of the hospital. And then, and other things I've gone through in earlier slides. We did see an initial energy dip by week 4, because we did start the Big Bang in January, and as you know, January, February is a very busy time. So what we introduced was a new separate thing. We started on board rounds, and then we moved to PDD as a new focus. So having a new focus, we did it monthly, is better than just one thing and trying to push it forward. Data, as I said before, clinical engagement by the consultants was especially difficult in general surgery, because we have wards that have many different patients, all different consultants, and because they didn't want to do a board round for not their patients, then they didn't want to engage. So it's only happened now, but we're starting our board meeting at 11, so they've all done their ward round by then, and there's a rota now for each consultant to take the board round at 11 o'clock. And it was a decision they came up with themselves, so we are seeing progress in regards to that. But TNO was a separate thing, and Pete can vouch for Sue Deakin, who was very engaging, very much drove her ward. And you definitely see Red2Green works better when the clinician is engaged fully. As I said, Big Bang isn't right or wrong. We're definitely talking to other hospitals. The gradual process worked for them. But what we noticed in West Suffolk, when we do gradual, it tends to stagger and stop. So that's why we decided to go Big Bang. And these are all the many separate things that we're doing on now. And PJ paralysis and criteria-led discharge is being initiated by, or not initiated, it's always ongoing, but is being led by the head of nursing. Nope, that's it. Right, we'll just go on.
Great, thank you, Siobhan, and thank you for stepping in at the last minute. West Suffolk's really, I think, really quite a good case study because I've only visited about there 3 or 4 times. On the first occasion, met by the Chief Executive, Steve Dunn, brilliant Chief Executive, really good exec team, real buy-in from the top, real value on patients' time. The first time I spoke, there was a big group of doctors, nurses, therapists, everyone in the room buying into the concept. And their results, you know, to be going from middle of the mid-85s to 92 to 95 for 15 weeks, I think it's pretty good going. But more importantly, the other measures, you know, so reducing the number of outliers and so on and so forth. Sinead talked about Sue, the clinical director for orthopaedics, who's also from Birmingham, which is important. But really impressive results. Now, just to reiterate with Red2Green, so Red2Green's a tool. When you go back to your places, please use PDSA. Just don't go, the next thing we're going to do is this, and do it top down. And one of the things, people talk about social movement quite a lot really. Social movement is not tweeting. It's really important to make distinguish between the two. And when you're trying to, you know, work with Red2Green and the Safer Patient Flow bundle, if you do this stuff on the left, I have some very interesting red, amber, green key performance indicators. Boring. Your teams don't get it. They won't really like it. What they want to hear is they want to hear more of this. You know, and I'm not saying you're going to go back to your organisation to be Martin Luther King, but he wouldn't have stood on that platform and said, I have a dream but don't have a trajectory, would he? Think of it. So it's more of this. It's more about the life in it. People want to see people who are willing to take a few healthy risks. And probably to make some of those jumps forward, we need a few people to do that. And this isn't just some bonkers guy at the front speaking like this. You know, social movement, if you really look into it, if you really want people to take action, I mean really take action and do stuff, rather than sitting in meetings looking at your phones, you've got to connect with people's emotions. You have to connect with people's emotions. If you don't, do you know what? They probably won't do it. What percentage of change doesn't work? What do you think? About 70%. So most of the things you plan, we're going to do this, most of them won't work. Believe that or not? Yeah. So in order to make it work, you've got to connect with people. And has anyone heard of end pyjama paralysis? Do you think that was created in a meeting room? Do you think there was a project initiation document? Do you think there was one KPI? Do you think the people behind it broke any rules? Yeah. Well, I'll tell you how it originated. Brian Dolan visited with my colleague Tim to Nottingham with Anne-Marie Riley, the Deputy Chief Nurse there. And on the way back, Brian did a tweet, which was nursing was born in the church and raised in the army, and pyjamas are the uniform that we put on our patients. Let's do something about that. And the four of us had a chat with a bit of a laugh. We said, wouldn't it be funny if we created a national campaign around this? And actually, by really creating movement, what we've seen is people doing something differently. But did it cost any money? No, not a penny. Was there one meeting? No, a few phone calls between various countries and things like that. But what you did is you got momentum because it connects with people. It connects with people. So if you're thinking about Red2Green, Safer, just think a bit more on this one. But you know, if you're an organisation, don't mandate your staff to wear pyjamas. That isn't where it originated from. Do not mandate this. This needs to be grassroots up. The point is, get patients up, get them dressed, get them moving and get them fed. That might seem obvious, but I guarantee you in your hospitals, if you listen to the evidence I said to you earlier on, you will have patients deconditioning now, today. Get them up tomorrow, make that commitment. Who's going to make that commitment? That at least one extra patient will be dressed up and moving tomorrow. Who's not? So I challenge you now to make that commitment. Are you going to do it? I don't think you will. Maybe? This is Ian Sturgis, who's one of our old doctors, who's now the medical director for the south of England. That's his father just before he died. And his father was in Spain. You know what, Ian, he's quite lively sort of doctor, geriatrician. One of his aims was to get his father out of hospital, to get him back home in Spain, give him a pint, get him dressed and watch England beat Scotland. That was his aim, and that's what he did. So, talking about social movement, that's the thing. And then in terms of Twitter, yeah, NPJ process has taken off. But these are some of Anne-Marie's Riley's slides, which I think are quite powerful. How many of you would choose to eat your meals lying in one of these beds every day? How many of you would? You wouldn't. What about this one down here on the left? If this was the visitor or staff toilet, would you use it? Seriously, now. What we're going to do is put half of you in your pyjamas, put a commode in that corner and ask you to use it. Would you do that? Would you feel okay with it? Think about that. So tomorrow, what we'd ask you to do when you go back to your organisations is do something different. And then just to finish off, you know, a lot of the sort of sites and systems that we see do really well, they have high levels of self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the belief that you can do it. You either believe you can or you can't. I'm going to split the room in half. I imagine half of you think, what a load of nonsense, and then half of you think you probably can. And that's probably likely to happen. Some of you will just think, why did I come to this session? What I'd implore you to do is have some belief that you can make some of this stuff happen. And it's not just, you know, me talking about, there's evidence to say, if you have high levels of self-belief, you will make it happen. You will make it happen. And it doesn't take as much effort as you need, and it doesn't take as many people as you need, and it doesn't take lots of meetings. So yeah, and then this is one of the final slides from someone called Paul Plesek, who's had a lot of input into the ECIST training for ECIST things. He talks about thinking more like a farmer than a firefighter. So that might sound a bit odd, but a farmer creates conditions that nurtures crops. Farmers don't shout at their plants. They don't performance manage the potatoes. Think about it. And they become, you know, one of the bits of advice here is be comfortable with a plan which is less exact. Perfection is the enemy of getting things done. Trying to look for the perfect PID is the wrong thing to do. And be good enough with the road less travelled. Give it a go, test it out, be iterative, lots of PDSAs. And then my final slide before we take some questions is, you know, if you've got just imagine you've got a whole set of stairs in front of you. You don't have to see all the stairs. You just need to take 1 or 2 steps. So when you leave the session today, our thing would be go back to your organisations and start with 1 or 2 things. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to do some questions now.
Did you say this is being developed for community services as well?
Yeah. So in Midlands and East, well, not just in Midlands and East actually. One of my colleagues in the ECIST team, ECIST, is working with a number of community trusts. That's not just hospitals, but that's also caseload services. And what we find is it's really applicable. And mental health services. So we had a Cruise event the other day, Ian, and one of the chief operating officers from Worcestershire Mental Health Trust was talking about the work he'd done in mental health. And there is a nursing home where they've done it as well. There's a very powerful video. If you look at the YouTube channel ECIST1, ECIST capitals 1, you'll see a video from a nursing home, really powerful story. Remember, it's just a tool. It's the approach, the attitudes, behaviours and cultures that will make it work. Any other questions?
Have you any top tips for medical engagement to move this forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've seen this enough to know what works. First of all, do you know what? The doctors need to be communicated with. I know that sounds really, really obvious, but having a conversation with them. So if you just email out to the doctors, we are going to do Red2Green and the Safer Patient Flow Bundle. You may get some funny some reactions, but also remember doctors, the way they're trained, will like some data. And data in the right way. I would use statistical process control charts in the right way to say this is the facts, this is what's happening. But do you know what? If you genuinely use the model for improvement and quality improvement approach and PDSA, the majority of staff will be okay with it. And maybe use the big room approach. There's something in Lean called the Obeya approach. So I think of a place like South Warwickshire and Sheffield who've done a lot of work with frailty. They get the whole team and patients in one room. They have a discussion and they go, right, we're going to just discuss what we're going to do. We're going to test it out. Those type of approaches I think work.
I want to mention in West Suffolk we use the competition approach as well. So our dashboards can narrow down to ward or to consultant level and when you're in the same general division, it generally helps, and they'll go, oh, he's doing better than me. I wonder what he's doing. So that has helped within West Suffolk.
So there's a bit of measurement for improvement and a bit of measurement, the occasional measurement for judgment. I wouldn't use measurement for judgment too much, but occasionally measurement for competition maybe. Any more questions? We've got some questions here. Ian, do you want to take some questions? I'll read out some questions for Ian.
Thank you.
It's the same questions as chap over here. Is the Red2Green approach being adopted by community health services? We've answered that. How do you address consultants that didn't get on board?
I mean, one thing to say on that is we're asking them. So we've sent out a survey monkey to all the trusts in Midlands and East, to medical directors, and asked them to send it on to clinical directors. We've had about over 100 responses so far. We're currently in the process of assimilating those answers to actually ask these questions. What is it that will help you in terms of adoption of Safer and Red2Green? What are the sort of things that are currently obstacles to that adoption? So we're in the process of working that through, and then as I said earlier, what we'd like to do is develop not a programme, not a course, but actually just a peer support development network for those people, because actually it's a really hard job. I know we quite often criticise doctors, but actually it's really hard what they have to do. You know, they're not necessarily promoted to be a manager, and we expect them to control their colleagues as clinical directors. So it's about helping them and reaching out to them. So we'll wait for those results and we'll pull something together.
Can I say locally as well, we have done workshops where the medical director and the exec nurse have met with the consultants and listened to the feedback and have adapted. As I said, F6, which is a surgical general surgery ward, we have adapted to change for them. But I think feedback sessions are always good as well.
Yeah, I think West Suffolk's a really good example of engaging consultants. Just for where we're out of time, last question was, can you define Red2Green? Is it the removal of time wasted for patients? Yeah, it is. I mean, the final thing from us is, if you're going to do Red2Green properly, it's about using patients' time as the greatest currency in healthcare and giving patients their time back. So thank you very much.